Okay, we're being recorded after the prayer. So the prayer wasn't recorded, so I'm not sure if it's going to be a holy recording or not. We'll have to figure that out later. So Whitney, will you be my 45-minute person? Whitney's not listening.
Yes, I'll be your 45-minute person.
Okay, you did a good job last time. So
What does that mean?
What's that, Hala?
What does that mean?
So it's about an hour and a half if we go the entire time. So I say we're being recorded at the beginning, and I say again at the 45-minute mark, hey, we're being recorded, so that people can not show their face or whatever, drop out. So here it is. Okay, so I'm going to read from Deuteronomy 6, beginning verse 4, read several verses there. This is the, it's called the Shema, which means hear. It's the imperative in the Hebrew for listen up, pay attention, or hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. So that's what this is. And what follows it are instructions for parents and children. And it's clear in the Hebrew Bible or in the Old Testament that the responsibility for passing on the faith to another generation lies with the parents of the children and not so much with the religious leaders of the day, but with the parents. And so one of the things that we say at Hope Chapel is our job, we believe our job is to come alongside parents and to help them in the nurture and admonition or the raising of their children, but really we're helping parents. We're not doing it for them. So here is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And I'll stop right there. So the great creedal statement of Israel, the Lord our God, is one, and you shall love the Lord with all your strength, is to be taught to the children, which means that the faith is to be passed on from one generation to another generation, parent to child. And that's how the Hebrew Bible has things set up. So here we'll all go now to the New Testament, to the book of Ephesians. So Ephesians chapter 6, if you're following. That was Deuteronomy 6, and this is Ephesians 6. You know these verses very well, I'm sure. Ephesians 6, 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. The word discipline is translated in the King James as nurture. The word instruction is translated admonition. In the first case, the idea behind the Greek word is teach children in ways that children can get what's being taught. Don't bring them in close to you. So the idea behind nurture is that you teach children in ways that are appropriate for whatever age group they are. So when children are very small, they need to be held and maybe even fed, but be taught in very close proximity. And then the word for instruction is a word that comes from the Greek word for mind. So it is a word that means to pass on knowledge. So we're not just nurturing our children as we raise them, we are passing on instruction to them. And so this is the idea. And then it's interesting that he says, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger or to wrath. So there's some instruction there for parents about how we're to live in grace and in harmony with our children, not to make them so angry with us. All right, so a couple of things, then I'm going to let Hala talk. Tonight we want to help parents as far as we can with the discipling of their children in the COVID-19 crisis. My assumption is there will be a number of people who will look at this later as a recording. So I don't have much to say about that. because I'm going to let Hala do most of that work. But I do want to say that as a faith community, we have a huge responsibility to help parents in lots of different ways in this difficult season of life. So I adopted and raised two children's into adulthood, and I can just testify from my experience that those were very, very difficult years. Children appropriately, we must invest all the time that we can into our children. At times it can be an emotional difficulty or a turmoil with our kids as they grow and begin to push back and become independent. And then there are just various challenges that come along with life. So this becomes, and typically for most of us, we are bearing and raising children in the early years of our either our education and or our development of our career. So we're very, very busy, very, very focused elsewhere oftentimes. And it becomes a struggle to try to balance, I don't know if balance is the right word, but to meet the needs of career building as well as rearing children. And I think that's a huge struggle in our society. But the church is supposed to be a place where parents the church ought to be a place where parents and children find safety and support and encouragement. So we have at Hope Chapel a very fine director of ministry to children, Hala Tompkins. She is not just good, she is really good. So I tell her these things behind the scenes too. So I don't mind saying it here in front. She's really, really good at what she does, works really hard, and has really good insight. And she's a grandma now, so she's really easy to get along with. So, so that's that. So that's one resource at Hope Chapel. Another one is that we spend money, excuse me, not just investing in staff, but also in our building, which we can't use, but hopefully we'll be back to it soon. But not too soon. We don't want to get there before we should, but that's been a major issue as well. So anyway, I wanted to say that. So then the third leg on the stool for me is that for parents who are raising children, they should find in the faith community of Hope Chapel resources, yes, support, yes, encouragement, yes, but they also should find other adults who've walked the path, gone before them, and on whom they can rely or ask advice. But also they can and should have an expectation that when their children are in the midst of the community, their children are safe. Their children are safe to see adults who live exemplary lives, not just perfect lives, but lives that are examples. And it's a place where around other people who don't believe exactly what they believe or think exactly the way they do, but have a similar commitment to holiness and to goodness, so that it becomes a healthy place in which to raise children. So I think those three things are really important: staff, building, and then a community that's important, that's helpful. All right, so that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Hala Tompkins. So please welcome her to the show.
Thanks. So often, for many years now, Gino and I have taught in tandem on this topic. He teaches the side that you heard, and then I teach more, what does our home life look like? What should it look like? What are principles we can find to build our life on, to build our home on, that will help it be a place where Jesus is loved and we love each other and God's kingdom becomes evident. So I love this topic, just so you all know, but I'm always studying, I'm always reading, I'm always refining how I present my portion of this material. Gino's is pretty static, not in a bad way, but it's stable. The principles he teaches don't change, but the priorities, it feels like our culture is changing so rapidly that I often have to kind of reorient myself. What are the things families are struggling with most now? How can I address those things? So I actually think the most important, like Gino listed those 3 priorities, I think the community is so important to raising healthy kids that I actually start my class in Titus in the 2nd chapter. And I read verses 11 to 14, but actually that chapter is just such a beautiful chapter about how God's family is a family and how we are to regard each other and honor each other. And so I would start there tonight by saying it gives us things to aim for. When Paul is writing to Titus in chapter 2, verse 2, he says, older men are to be temperate, dignified, sensible, sound in faith, in love, in perseverance. Okay, that's a good list to aim for, you older men. And then older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good, that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be dishonored. Wow. Okay, so when you find a woman like that, tag along, pay attention to her, and see what you can learn from her. And then he goes on to young men, be sensible in all things, show yourself to be an example of good deeds, with purity in doctrine, dignified, sound in speech, which is beyond reproach, in order that the opponent may be put to shame, having nothing bad to say about us. Again, those are the kinds of people, like when we do our child dedications at Hope and we say, we will aspire to live lives worthy of modeling or emulating in front of this child. This is the kind of life we as Christians should be aiming for. It's not a low bar. So the part that I pay attention, he then goes on to talk about bond slaves, how they should behave. And then he says in verse 11, for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all men, instructing us to deny ungodliness and worldly desires, and to live sensibly, righteously, and godly in the present age, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus, who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself a people for his own possession, zealous for good works. And what does that have to do with parenting, you may ask? I would say that the purification process gets jump-started when you become a parent, because it's easy to manage stuff before you're a parent. Like it's just you and your spouse. You chose your spouse, you know their quirks and oddities, and you're okay with those, but then you're handed a child, however you arrive at parenthood, and you don't get to choose anymore. God gives you this person uniquely designed to help you grow up. And so that, for a Christian, should create in us a desire to be more like Jesus so that we can be the best parent we can be to that child. And that's where purification comes in. And when we cooperate with God's process, we have the benefit of knowing it's not for nothing, but also really good stuff comes out of it. That's, to me, one of the most humbling things, is how God can take an ordinary person who decides they're going to do what God asks and brings huge blessing as you walk day by day. Now I look back after 32 years of marriage, 4 sons, 3 daughters-in-law, 3 granddaughters, and I'm like, how did this happen? It's good. So my first thing is, we need to be living lives that are pursuing God. So the first thing we can do to help our children is to be responsible for our spiritual growth and our character. Does that make sense, Gino?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it makes great sense. I love how you walk through Titus too there. Yeah.
I love that chapter. I go back to a lot. It's always challenging to me. I'm not addicted to much wine, so I got that part down. But after that, I'm always challenged by Titus too. especially verse 5. So anyway, so that's where I start. And then I talk about our priorities as Christians, which is seek first God's kingdom, his righteousness, the Shema that Gino read to us out of Deuteronomy 6. Even the first commandment, have no gods before me. Well, I haven't yet fulfilled that one. I'm still trying just to obey the first commandment of God's. And so as I do that, though, as my heart is continually asking God, how can I love you better, more completely, and love myself less, then he changes me and he gives me opportunities to practice. And so then the second priority after loving him and making him the center of my life is to pay attention to my spouse and my marriage. So for parents, the challenge always is, once I become a parent, it's really easy to focus on my kids and ignore the guy who helped me get them, or ignore the lady who's taking care of them all day. But those kids are really cute. They may not, the adults in the house may not have showered or whatever, but those kids are really cute. They're easy to hang out with. So we talk a lot about how our marriage is critically important. I think that's true today more than ever. Where are our kids, the kids being raised in the church, where are they going to see Christian marriage modeled, if not in their own homes? They won't see it anywhere else. They won't see it on TV. They may see it in a grandparent's relationship. It's possible, our kids in the church, but it almost doesn't exist. So if there's no other reason you want to have a strong, healthy marriage, and I would say to you, there are lots of good reasons to aspire to that, for the sake of your children and their marriages, you should invest well in your marriage. Devastation happens when people ignore their marriage relationship because it's easy to invest all you have in your kids or your career. And then 20 or 25 years later, you have no marriage anymore. And I know many people from all walks of life, but when you hit the empty nest, if you don't have anything in common with your spouse anymore, your marriage struggles very greatly. It may not survive. And then the last priority is our kids after that. And the beauty of God's plan is simply that when our priorities are in order, our kids thrive. When they know we love God and they know we love mommy or daddy, then our kids are secure in that. And it's much easier to help them believe that God is loving, he's good, he's faithful, because their world is a much more stable world. So I don't know how much further you want me to go, Gino, or if you want me to pause.
Well, yeah, let's just let's take a deep breath here and see if we've stirred anybody up. Not necessarily so much with questions, because I don't think we've said anything that's all that questionable, but maybe somebody has something on their mind they would like for us to discuss, or maybe we stirred up something. Anybody? So everybody feels good about their engagement with children and how they've parented their kids, and maybe you have a question for somebody else who needs some help with their
Your dear friend.
your dear friend.
Yeah.
Good friend. These kids are wild.
Well, I would simply add that this extended time of home alone has had different impacts on different families, you know.
Yeah, that's good. You should kind of go there a little bit. That would be good.
So I check in a lot with Hope's families. I not as much as I wish I could, but I do try to check on people and see how they're doing so I can be praying appropriately and also just encourage people as I'm able. And I'm hearing kind of two different stories, generally speaking. First story is from families who really have hated how busy their lives have been, and the fragmentation of sending one child to this school and two children to that school, and playing baseball or soccer and having different things, and they're never at home together. So now they're home together doing none of the other things, and they're really enjoying it, and they're kind of going through a detoxification period where they're reevaluating stuff. So are we gonna go back to the crazy pattern when we're allowed to? Are we going to do all of those different sports? Am I going to homeschool? Several families have said to me, I've always wanted to homeschool. I've never been brave enough to try it. Now I'm being forced to do it. So they were excited about the opportunity to try it out.
Yeah, now we're all homeschoolers and televangelists. Yeah.
Oh my. So that's one side, but the other side is very different. And that is often, so in those first families, often there's a parent at home already. So the adjustment is for the parent who isn't used to staying home all day and then just working out workspace and stuff like that. But in the second case, both parents are used to going to work and their kids are used to being in school all day, and now they're all at home. Both parents still are supposed to accomplish something, as are the children, and it is nothing but stress. So it's much harder for families in that situation. They're like, I never dreamed of homeschooling. I didn't sign up for this. I'm barely keeping my head above water. I'm doing my job. If I try to teach my kids and do my job, I'm going to do both badly. So we're just going to worry about the paycheck part, and school will have to take care of itself. That's the other side of it. And then, of course, in both those situations, where there's weakness, right, pressure is going to be applied, and where there's weakness, you're going to start seeing some cracks and stuff. And we could be afraid of that and say, oh man, if it just weren't for COVID, our families wouldn't be struggling, or they wouldn't be in hard places. But I tend to view it differently, maybe because I've raised 4 teenagers, that I think it's God's mercy when we are given the opportunity to glimpse weaknesses and flaws and brokenness, because we know that's exactly where he wants us to be, looking to him. And that's where he's going to work, and that's where his most beautiful stories are written. When we can do everything on our own, we don't need him. When we are willing to admit that we really don't know what we're doing and we don't know how we're going to manage, he meets us in those places. And I've seen it over in my own life, and I'm seeing it now today again in our families at Hope.
Okay, I'm going to give you all a few seconds to ask a question. I have a couple.
I don't have a question. I have another group to add to your group, Paula.
Okay.
It's the ones who are always home with their kids, and now they're used to getting small little chunks of breaks,
Mm-hmm.
and now there's been 0 breaks. Whether it's been your friend would take them for a play date for a few hours, or you'd switch a child, or they were in a sport for an activity for an hour or two. Like Errol was doing gymnastics on Tuesday once a week, from like 11 to 1. So there was an individual time where I could spend with just Cora, and then like Cora did a thing on Thursdays for an hour or so, and then I got to spend individual time. So then there's that other.
And then there was
dynamic.
Sunday morning where you could deposit them both, and you and John could actually sit together and worship without distractions. And then there's, for us, I hear it from our MOPS moms too. One of them texted our group and said, I miss all of you a lot, but I really miss the childcare at MOPS, where she could leave her never stopping toddler. Her toddler is literally on or off. Either she's going 100 miles an hour or she's crashed in her bed. She hasn't been able to leave her anywhere. It's only her. So yes, thank you, Missy.
That was my life since Cora was born. Like Cora was like we've only gone on one date with just John and I, like an overnight thing since since Cora's been born, because my in-laws were not going to watch her. My parents were in Pennsylvania, and I was not going to leave them with them, because I wasn't sure whether they were actually going to
Keep up with her.
like actually watch her because they had the TV on all the time.
Yeah.
So we had one friend who watched her for like one overnight that we did, and we picked her up and they were like, she has a lot of energy. Like they had 2 girls and their little girls couldn't keep up with Cora. Like their 2 little girls could not keep up with Cora. We were not asked if we wanted to go on another date.
That was it. Hope you had a great time, Missy.
Rare, huh? Wow. Okay, so so I have a question, Hala, and Melissa, Missy, you could answer it too if you wish. Is it okay for me to be tired of having to hang out with my kids?
You want to answer that, Missy?
Yes, it is okay. I've turned on the TV and I've grabbed my chocolate and I went to my bedroom and I said, don't bother me.
Yeah. If you weren't tired, you wouldn't be human. That would be weird because this is really hard and it's a really long stretch of time. So the trick is, like, where can you hide your chocolate where your kids won't find it? Because I was with my daughter-in-law this weekend and she's like, they found my candy stash. I have none left. So yeah, got to hide it well, up high probably, and pick your time. Mm-hmm.
That's great. What other suggestions for kind of getting away from our kids a little bit, and so we don't get just sick of being with them? Not that anybody is ever sick of being with their children. I'm gonna confess that I was from time to time, but
you want to go, Missy? What do you do?
I mean, right now there's not anything
Nothing?
really. You know,
you don't tie anybody to a tree and go on.
No.
I have neighbors who might watch me and then might call the department people.
Yeah.
So
I have some ideas.
It was a bad joke.
No, I have some ideas. I first of all, from the time kids are very little, I always say everyone should always have an afternoon downtime.
Yeah, nap time. Yeah,
Always, whether they fall asleep or not. Like I could never make my kid fall asleep, but I could train them to stay in their room for an hour. Now, most of the time, every once in a while, I would nap, they wouldn't, and it became very interesting. But mostly my boys learned to stay in their room and they could read, they could play quietly, but they had to stay in their room for an hour. And often by the end of that hour, at least a couple of them were asleep. So having, instituting quiet hours for 1 or 2 hours every afternoon for me was my sanity saver. And it does no one any harm to learn how to play quietly alone for a little while. It actually does a lot of good for our kids. So that's one thing. Something I do with my granddaughters is I read them books on Zoom. And so they're staring at a screen, it's true, but it's a little more interactive than just watching a show or something. And I read to them for 15 or 20 minutes while their mom can go do something else for that amount of time. So that's a couple things I'm pretty sure would work to give you a short break. But also playing outside with water, to me, that was always magic. If I could get them outside with water, then they'd take their afternoon nap pretty well. So, and outside with water, if it's shallow water, it doesn't require a lot of supervision and they can be as messy as they want.
Anybody else? Anybody want to add to this?
Lynette, it hasn't been that long for you. Any suggestions?
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Okay, it's all right.
In one sense, it hasn't been very long, but in another sense, because my youngest is a teenager and I've got all the older ones, my older ones have always been a big part of keeping my younger ones occupied.
Mm-hmm.
So you recommend at least 4 children? you recommend having at least 4 children?
I do.
And having as many as God gives you. But very often, particularly the idea, when you can, of having the older ones do things with the younger ones. You know, as we train the older ones, then they begin to be able to train the younger ones. And so, or giving the older ones things to do, tasks that I could have done, but that they could do for me, where it taught them to do something and to take some responsibility. And even though I might have done it differently, it's good for them to try and learn.
Yeah.
She started out with trying to train me, but gave up and started training other children.
Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have laughed so hard, Jerry. Sorry.
Mhm.
Okay, let me see if I can move us a little ways. So everybody's a homeschooler now. So I assume there are some tricks to being. I've never homeschooled, so I assume there's some tricks like a schedule and like a room or some. What are some tricks to homeschooling that would help our people that are listening?
Well, there's 3 of us who have I have 4 of us who have homeschool experience on this call, because didn't Martha homeschool? No? Okay. Well, Missy, Lynette, and I have.
Nope.
Nope. Only Sue. Only your best friend.
Terrible at homeschooling.
Okay. That's fair.
Why are you smiling, Jim?
One of the downsides of public school is we were band parents for about 8 or 10 years.
Football parents,
Mhm.
football games.
Yeah.
They had to go to football games just to watch the band.
Mhm.
Okay, so homeschooling tricks of the trade. Let's hear something.
I'm going to give one because I was a kid that had to get homeschooled for a few months when my dad was sent to USC and rewarded. If we could get our work done, then there was a reward of a thing we got to do, which I'm sure you all already know, but I can't tell you how motivated we were to get our schoolwork done by noon so we could do that thing.
So it was a bribes are okay.
Mhm.
Well, in my opinion, as a child, they certainly were.
Mhm. I could say a lot, but Lynette and Missy, I'd love for you guys you're still doing it.
Well, I think probably one of the biggest things that I've learned and had to grow in is to be less rigid and go with the way things go. Yes, have a general plan, but realize it is just that it's a general plan or it's a routine. Trying to stick to a set quote schedule. It might be doable if you only have 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
When you have 10, when you have 4, I've actually really laughed because when I was in college, I remember having my entire week, but my day set out in 20-minute increments. And I knew what I was going to be doing, when, and, it's going to go do this, then, and doesn't work that way because someone needs a little bit more time on something else or, on one thing or, so just learning how to be flexible is huge. And then really just seeing what each child's strengths and weaknesses are and working along with that. Yes, there are some basics that we have to have, but how can we individualize things and help them grow into the person that God has designed them to be?
Okay.
Any tips, Missy?
For me, it was, I think it was a year ago at this point, I took I think it's called a homeschool boot camp, something like that a homeschool parent
Sounds
does.
hardcore.
It actually wasn't.
Okay.
She came up with this thing called MVD, and it's called minimal viable day. So if you woke up and it was going to be a crapshoot day and you knew that's what was going to happen, or you get started and everything just starts going off the rails, you create like about 3 things that you're like, these things need to be done. And then we can say, we checked our box that we did school today.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it was Bible, math, reading.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could get those done in about an hour, then we can be like, now we have doctor's appointments or somebody got sick or whatever. Then you got those 3 things done every day or that day or whatever it was. And then you can just let the rest go. You don't need to do science. We don't need to do art. We don't need to do all these other things that we had planned in that day. So,
Yeah.
And also to remember that we're not public schooling at home.
Right. That's good. It's a different thing. It's a different animal entirely. That's good.
Mm-hmm. And now, it's also, there was a term coined recently. I don't like terms, but called crisis schooling.
Mm.
So, and that's kind of what we're doing. We're in this pandemic. We're in this crisis. You know, we've all been thrown, like, even those who have been homeschooling like me, like, we're not homeschooling like we normally do. Like, we're not normally stuck at home. We usually went to the library every other week, you know. Library isn't open, at least in Travis County. Georgetown has opened theirs for, what is it called?
Curbside.
Yeah, where you like go in and you reserve them and then doing that. And then, but Travis County hasn't even given an idea as to, so I still have my books from February.
Wow.
I have my Martin Luther King books still. Let's read those again. We're getting ready for Juneteenth. I usually get them all back out again because Cora's birthday is that day. And I usually go over all of that stuff again. So I'm like, come on. But yeah, that.
We have rewards, which means give your kids an incentive to work hard so that you can do something fun afterward. And then we have be less rigid, which ties to having a routine. I think having a routine, at least a goal of where you hope to go each day, is very helpful. And it's actually very helpful for your kids, because if they know what's expected of them and they know how to get to that reward, they'll own it much more so than if you just are trying to push them along to get to the reward. So having a routine. And then I would add to that, like, my non-negotiable is reading. Every day we should be reading to our kids. And I can't exaggerate the impact that reading to your children will have on them. And if you can read about science, you can read about art, you can read about math, you can read about Martin Luther King Jr., you can read about Bible heroes. Reading encompasses everything. And I have this book, I brought it just so I could show you. If you don't know why reading to your children is so important, borrow this book and read it. That's funny. And then start reading to your kids. It's incredible. I've quoted an article. I read an interview years ago from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and they were interviewing a sociologist who said that children who come from 2-parent homes where children have bedtime rituals have an unfair advantage and they shouldn't have that advantage. He knew what he was saying was absurd, but he was still saying that it was unfair to kids who don't have a caring parent who reads to them every day. And the power of reading to your child is more impactful than sending them to the most elite private schools you could ever imagine. Reading to your child changes everything. So for me, if it was a rough day, and even if my boys were sick or I was sick, we still could manage somehow to read. Someone else could read while I lay on the couch suffering or whatever, you know. But so if we accomplished nothing else, Missy had her baseline. My baseline was we're going to read out loud. So often I read books that were above their reading level, but not above their comprehension level. So when I read out loud to them, I would read books they couldn't yet read on their own until, of course, they were 4th or 5th grade when they could read everything. But I would add to my R's, read every day. If that's all your homeschool consists of, it's okay. That's enough. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Well done. So if there aren't any other dishes, I have another question to pose.
I had a small thing. I don't know if it exactly fits, but especially when Chris was little. But I think all of the kids, of course, you know, it wouldn't fit with the COVID thing. But I would be out in the car and I would tell him stories, and we would sing. We'd either have stories. I would tell endless stories, or we would sing, and that was kind of keeping from pestering me in the car. That doesn't make sense because it took my attention also to do the stories and the songs, but it would keep him behaving himself. And of course, back then kids could be in the front seat. When the girls were little, you know, we'd switch back and forth between the front seat and the back seat, and they had a little odd and even code. But so whoever got to sit in the front seat was, you know, in the catbird seat. But reading, nah, you can read. I agree with the reading. It's just so cool to read. Even when I would be nursing Jenny and Emily was 2 years old, and she'd be up next to me and we would read, you know. So Jenny got anything out because she was tiny, but Emily did. Anyway, that's it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I wasn't clear, Martha. Were you singing, or were your children singing with you, or what?
We sang together.
Everybody sang together. All right. Okay.
Yeah, I would, I would kind of lead the singing, whatever, but we all sing.
Yeah, I remember singing with my mother in the car too. I could sing some of the songs right now, but not before.
I also, talking about expectations, this is a very small thing, but the one time we were on a car trip, driving vacation, and the girls were both little and they were still in car seats, and I was wondering how in the world I'm going to get them to take a nap. And I just said, okay, it's time for naps, and put your head down. And back then the car seat still had the little bar that came over them, and so they had a little place to put their heads down, and they put their heads down and went to sleep. And I was just so amazed. I thought, hot dog, that works. I never expected it, but I thought, give it a try.
So I think I'd like to add that what Martha just said is a whole lot of parenting. I just thought I'd try this and see if it would work. By golly, it worked.
Yeah. I always used to tell younger moms coming up after me, babies don't know anything. You think you don't know anything, but they don't know you don't know. Go ahead and just try it. You know, they don't know you don't know anything. They think you know everything. So go ahead.
That's awesome.
That's so good.
Okay, so I do want to turn the corner to a slightly different topic. So the text that I read had to be about passing on the faith. So how do we pass on the faith to our kids? How do we do that? There should be some philosophy here as well as practical things. So how do we do it?
And while they're thinking about that, Gino, are we still recording?
Yes. Oh, well done. Whitney. We are still recording. Thank you very much. Whitney, you're just great, Whitney. I love that.
Well, the stories we told in the car were Bible stories.
So was that a comment about passing on the faith?
Yeah. That's all Bible stories. All that driving around was Bible stories I was telling in the car.
Yeah, among all the other stories. Yeah. We told a lot of stories to our kids, and we had to tell our kids Jesus is real, Santa is not. That was we had in our neighborhood. Somebody put out on the lawn a Santa bowing the knee to Jesus. It's terribly confusing to our young kids.
Wait. Did
Jim.
you say Santa wasn't real?
Oh. No.
Sorry,
Now, see,
Martha.
Gino,
Martha, you got some inner healing there to do after a while.
That's right. We got some work to do.
Okay, Jim, did you have your hand up?
Well, some folks that I've sort of glanced off 2 or 3 times that seem to have some good materials is the Fuller Youth Institute. And Holly, you and Glenn had mentioned at one time you all did the book Sticky Faith. So this is by the same people that did that book. And I'll stick in the notes here. I listened to a podcast just probably about 2 weeks ago entitled What Young People Need from Adults. And it was by Kara Powell, who's the leader there. And I thought it was a very helpful 30 or 40 minute oral presentation of things that adults can kind of have in their mind that can help young people. I don't know that they do a whole lot with really young children. They might. My feeling is that they mostly kind of present things for youth leaders, junior high, high school kind of thing. One thing they said, I thought was sort of interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, give us 1 or 2 things, Jim.
What?
Give us 1 or 2 things.
Well, she in this podcast, she used the acronym ABCDE and talks about what each of those letters mean. I'll tell you real quickly what they said. So that's one example. A is ask how your child is doing. And then she gives some suggestions for how to ask that question. B was breathe, slow down, just get kids to take deep breaths. This is in the background question is, what do you do about anxiety? Young people suffering from anxiety. So C is my favorite, which stood for center. And she said that in their family, they settled on a word or a phrase that they emphasized all the time. And they loaded up that one word or phrase with lots of different meaning. So when they could exhort and encourage their children just by texting that one word. And for their family, the word was Emmanuel. So they would all the time, when they knew that somebody was facing a test or a tough day at school, they just sent them a test and say, Emmanuel. And that because of the way the family had loaded up that word with a lot of different things, it meant something. I'll share in our family, the phrase is wearing your mittens.
It's not quite the same.
Not quite the same thing as Emmanuel, but even this day, with our kids in their 40s, when something's up, we'll say, "Are you wearing your mittens?"
Mom is cold. Everybody has to wear their mittens. So it was.
Yeah.
I don't know, it had lots. It had lots around it, but.
D was develop a team, and they made an interesting proposition. They said, what if every young person in the church had 5 specific adults that were thinking and praying about them, and they even knew their names? So any teenager in the church said, I know that there are these 5 named individuals who are seeking God's best for me, and maybe I could even talk to them. And the last one, E, was empathize and empower your children. So anyway, I'll post a link to the podcast. I thought it was interesting, even though we're kind of beyond the age of having kids in that.
Still very good. Thanks. Hey, we're on the topic of how do we pass the faith on to the next generation. So how do we do it, everybody? We're going to actually run out of time here pretty soon.
So in our family, as part of our just having Bible involved in multiple different ways, um, was always important. We've had the kids do Bible study. We've had them do scripture memory. In general, we've tried to choose curricula that brings biblical worldview into what we're doing. But modeling that, my kids see that sometimes my alarm goes off and I stop and pray and then hit the snooze button and go back to what I was doing, and then it'll go off again in 10 minutes. And so, modeling is not only saying this is important, but showing by what we do that it's important.
Good. That's good. I think the most important thing we did was just pray with our kids at night. We prayed with them until they were mid-teens, probably every night. So, I mean, well, at least 5 days a week. Every night's probably too strong. But we pray with them very, very routinely. And we asked a lot of questions at bedtime. How are you doing? And there would be seasons from time to time when they didn't want to talk to us, or they were in trouble, or we were in trouble with them, whatever. But those weren't actually, they were not very frequent. Those were infrequent. Most of the time when they were settling down, they had things on their mind that they started asking us, I think, mid elementary school. They sort of caught on what it was that we were doing, really. And that's also when their own faith came alive. And so those are for us, I think, the very best times. Those times of praying over our children. Of course, we only had 2 we were raising, so we could do them individually. Go into one room, spend a little bit of time, and go into the other room, spend a little time. So it was a very good individual time. But that, I think, we passed on the faith there probably more than any other setting. So I strongly recommend some such thing as that. I also made them memorize the 10 Commandments, and they hated that. There were some of the best family stories come from that era when I was teaching them 1 commandment a month or something. It was ridiculous. It was terrible. Mr. Family Devotion, how to make your children hate the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible.
Words.
Words.
Can I tell a story on some of my friends?
Sure.
One of the things that they always did, and we knew this because sometimes we'd be there at night and then other times we'd be babysitting, is they did their family devotions, and they were incredibly creative with them, particularly the father. And so if they would read a story in the Bible, and one of the most fun things that they did when the kids were young was, and they had 4, is they would act it out, which of course makes them remember it a lot more. And that was a great deal of fun. And they had boys and a girl. So one of the things they did they did different things, but with the boys, they would just play, back in the day of cassette tapes, they'd just play the New Testament at night while they fell asleep. And they obviously were internalizing and remembering different parts of that. And that was always very cool.
So I think I would, you can see that what we do at home matters to our kids. If we say to our kids, going to church is important, being a good person is important, but we don't somehow model what love of God looks like, they'll have a moralistic attitude toward faith, but they won't have a relationship with the Lord. And so it's really important that we authentically live out what it is we say we believe. If we only say it, it's not good enough. Not good enough for our kids. And then in addition to that, what Glenn and I did, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I didn't have Christian parents to look back and say, oh, that's how they did this thing or whatever. So almost everything I do comes out of my desire to find good stuff to help me parent my kids and now grandparent my grandkids. And so I was always looking for good things to allow my children to participate in. And so we did Awana when they were little because it's the best Bible memory discipleship program I know of still. We did youth group when they were old enough to be in youth group. They were in youth group, and we were faithful about attending because I needed other adults in my kids' lives who were saying the same things I was saying, but my kids would listen to them. They, you know, they could say exactly the same thing, but they were cooler and they would listen. So finding those kinds of places where reinforcement of what we're teaching at home is going to happen. Summer camp, Christian summer camps fall into that same category. And Jim, I love the Fuller Youth Institute, and I've read a lot of their stuff and listened to Kara Powell a lot. And a complementary resource to that for younger kids is resilientdisciples.com. And that is a program from Awana that they are investing in, basically casting a vision for the church of 2050. What is that church going to look like? Who will the leaders be? Well, guess what? We're raising them now. And so what are we doing to raise strong leaders for the church of 2050? That's their question. And they provide resources to help us answer that question. So that was my strategy. Live authentically at home. We read the Bible, we prayed, we blessed our kids every night before they went to bed. We did all we knew to do, but all of us who are parents know doing all we know to do guarantees nothing. So we rely on God's mercy. We rely on his faithfulness to his own promises, because at the end of it, that's all we have to stand on is who is God? What's he promised? I have no plan B. This is all I've got. I'm all in. Whole hog, Gino. I'm in.
Whole
So-
hog. Whole hog. All the way in. That's good.
That's it. That's all. I've lived my entire Christian life banking on God's faithfulness. And he has yet to disappoint me. He is faithful beyond my greatest imagining.
Well done. So we got about 20 minutes left. We can return to this topic of how do we pass on the faith to the next generation. But why don't we talk a little bit? Okay, so let me take a deep breath. I have another thing to talk about, but it's more fun for me to talk about what you guys are interested in. So does somebody else have a topic or an issue that maybe a friend is having with her kids? Not anybody here, but somebody else might be having a problem. So does anybody want to talk about something like that? Okay, so let's Whitney, are you there still?
Yes, I'm here.
Did I wait? That wasn't 30 seconds. Did I wait long enough?
No, you didn't.
Okay. Does somebody else have something you'd like to talk about?
Not exactly something different, but just a shout out to Evan and then to Matt and Wes, who are doing the virtual meetings with our youth. That is really helping them stay connected. So thank you for your efforts there. And Hala, for your work with the younger ones, obviously.
Yeah, I think our staff, volunteer and paid staff, are doing an outstanding job in this season. I think that's really true. Thanks, Evan, for your good work. Okay, go ahead.
Happy to. That's all.
Well, I mean, I hear, almost everybody thinks their youth pastor is the coolest dude on the face of the earth, but that's kind of what I'm hearing about Evan. Evan, dude, Evan's got it. Evan, blah, blah. Okay, all right, I know he's cool. So, all right, so here we go. So how can people who don't have children at home or who've raised their kids, how can they help parents? How can they help parents? And is there a way for us to help that bridge there somehow? So some suggestions along these lines, assuming that this recording will be listened to at some point.
Are we talking COVID time or non-COVID time?
Can I let you pick which time you want to talk about? I'll let you pick.
Well, non-COVID time is spending time with our kids.
Okay.
To have them just be around other adults who are Christians, who care about them, and who can impart wisdom and fun things onto them. Yeah.
Okay.
That's mine.
So that looks like a picnic maybe, unless you know them real well, it wouldn't be childcare, right?
I mean, even like on Sunday mornings, like when we do the playground, like even if you don't have kids, coming out and being around
Okay.
the kids that are there, so that if you are married, young married, and will have kids someday, then all of a sudden you're like out there and they're like, whoa, who are you? They've seen you.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah. Or if you're done having kids.
Hey.
Hi. You gonna say hi?
Hi.
Hi, sweetie.
Hi.
Why do you not have your pajamas on? Go get your pajamas on.
No.
Yes, Mama.
I hate
Yes,
I'm
Bubba.
here to eat.
No, you're done eating. We already had dinner.
No, I'm not.
Sorry. Yeah. And then, yeah, just like being around them, so that
Mama, bookworm can have
I'm thinking of the time like when Cora got lost in the building. And if somebody had seen her up there, it's like, oh, you're looking for Cora? Yeah, I've seen her. Or I've told her, I said, your mama's looking for you, go downstairs. Like I knew who she belonged to, or they knew who she belonged to. That type of thing, like having that type of community. Because we're not a huge mega church. I went to one of those and I don't want to ever go to one of those again. Yeah.
So maybe it's something I can do is encourage the adults to get to know the names of the children that are around them. Do that?
That's one of the most common things I hear from people who volunteer in children's classrooms who don't have young children is, oh, it's been so great to get to know who these children belong to. Like I knew their parents, but I didn't know their children. I didn't know their names and how old they are. And so it bridges that.
Yeah. Yeah. The best thing that's happened to me is when you hired PJ, she became part of your staff, Hala. And then all of a sudden, PJ knows all the kids and who they belong to. And I'm saying, now whose little kid was that? Well, that's blah, blah, blah. And she belongs, blah. And after a while, I'm getting, the third time I ask, I get chastised by PJ. Oh, you remember? That's so, yeah, I do. You're right, sweet. and then they come up and they say hi to PJ, and I get introduced to them. And I'm not the stranger, not the man at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Oz. Good. What else? How do
Jim touched on a very, very important thing from Fuller Youth. When Jim said 5 caring adults, it actually only takes 1 caring adult, 1 person outside of a child's family who cares about them, who expresses interest in them, who asks how they're doing, who tells them, I missed you, I didn't see you last week, or when they go off to college, they stay in touch with them. That person can serve as an anchor to their faith that will help them stay tethered even through college and beyond. And so being that 1 caring adult is life-changing for kids. Yeah. And it's not as big an investment as it sounds.
I have to,
as difficult an investment as it sounds.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, a little bit of paying attention and giving genuine care to a young person or a child goes a long way. Remembering their name is huge. Mm-hmm. And knowing a few things about them is great. When my kids were very small, we were in family counseling with Sandy Wynn for various reasons, and I was brand new to Austin, very young. Well, I probably was never very young, but anyway, I was young, much younger. and our kids who are now in their mid 30s were little kids. And I don't know, Sandy. I think Sandy loves everybody deeply, but she certainly loved our children deeply. And our daughter Katie, who's now I think 36, Sandy Wynn had a Facebook relationship with our daughter until Sandy passed, and never ever lost touch. It was really a really amazing thing to observe. And so Sandy's death was a huge loss for my daughter. You know, certainly for me, but for my daughter, it was a really amazing thing. So, and there we had, I don't know if we had a team of 5 for our children, but we had 2 or 3, and it was huge it was huge for the kids. I think Hala alluded to this. It's huge for the parents. It's a huge help. And our kids, I mean, you're not cool after like the 4th grade or something like that. You're like, get out of here, you're old and you smell bad or whatever. But those other people, they're saying the same thing you said, and they're saying it worse. And they're wise and brilliant. And it's, after a while you go, okay, I know how this works. It's really important, really important. Develop a team. Well done, Jim.
So, I mean, Hala alluded to this as far as people getting involved on Sunday morning. Wednesday night has been like that for me. I have not, because we had so many, and I had kids who would work in children's ministry in my place. I really didn't do Sunday morning very often. And that was really important for me because I really needed that break. But being involved with the kids on Wednesday night, it's a smaller group, but I really feel like I know those families better now. So in terms of, encouraging people, what can they do? Have them volunteer.
Okay.
In a classroom on Wednesday night, or even incorporating the playground thing to say, hey, I'll watch your kids play so you guys can visit. Or
that's a great suggestion, actually.
Those sorts of
things. That's not scary at all. Yeah.
So Gino, you had wanted me to say some of the things that we're currently doing to help support parents during COVID. I might as well throw those out there now before we wrap up.
Okay.
So we're doing several things. Right now I'm doing them, but I am branching out starting in June, because we're all trying to figure out how to do this. So I have been making a weekly video. It's a little children's sermon. I went from someone who never wants to be in front of a camera ever to being in front of a camera
all the time.
Like all the time. So I make a 8 to 10 minute video teaching them something. Jim would recognize it from Good News Club. And I send that out in a letter on Saturday nights through an app called Remind, which I can also blame Jim Davis for. And I send that children's sermon along with some Bible lessons, along with some worship songs, along with a link to the Hope Kids slideshow, which if you haven't seen that, you should look at it. It's very fun. It's constantly being updated. It's pretty long now. And then kids' activity pages, the ones that they would normally do sitting in the pew on Sunday morning, they can get those at hope.org now. So all of that's in a one-page letter I send out each Saturday night. And when you subscribe to the Remind app, you have access to all of the previous week's files as well. And then, so that's Saturday night, parents get that. Some of them are using it on Sunday morning. And then on Mondays, we have MOPS on Zoom, and that is mostly a hangout time for moms with preschool age or younger children. And we have anywhere from 3 to 12 moms on there with us each Monday. And that's been fun. That's where I hear boy, I miss childcare. I miss babysitters. I miss date nights, all of these things. which one day will come back. Thursday afternoon at 4, I do a Zoom with our elementary kids. Sometimes younger siblings come along also, but my age range is, I'm aiming for like my 3rd graders in that meeting. So again, that's kind of modeled on a Good News Club. We play a funny game. We learn about a missionary. We pray, and whatever else I feel like doing that day. 45 minutes, we're done. And then Saturday mornings at 10 a.m., I am only tech support. I'm not on the screen on Zoom, but Dave and Ann Tibbetts are leading our 5th graders who are going to graduate and leave us in Hope Kids for the junior high ministry. This is a big group. We have 12 to 14 kids on any Saturday morning for an hour, and they are learning to think Christianly. What is worldview? What is my faith? How strong is my faith? Can it sustain itself? Will it withstand the stuff I'm going to be learning in school and the things I'm going to hear now that I'm growing up? And so we are helping them think about their faith. Do they own it? Is it solid? Is it safe to ask hard questions? Those kinds of things. We're walking through that with our graduating 5th graders. That'll be done when Dave says we're done, probably sometime in June, and then we'll graduate them to the junior high ministry. So those are some of the main things I'm doing. I'm going to replace my weekly video with a video from an elementary teacher and a preschool teacher. We'll have more targeted, like Sunday school lessons going out in my remind letter starting in June. We're missing a lot of milestones we normally get to celebrate this time of year, baptisms and promotions and different things. So we are trying to keep our kids as connected to each other and help parents know they have a safe place they can set their kid in front of the Zoom, and I won't get bombed because I know who's coming. So that's not going to happen again, ever. So anyway, those are some of the things we're doing.
Thanks. Okay, we have just a few minutes left. Is there something anybody wants to talk about? Any question? Everybody's kind of worn out. I want to say this, Hala, thank you for your time, giving us your time tonight. Our Tuesday Bible chat group is, we're grateful. I'm grateful. So thanks for coming.
I'm honored to be here. I love this topic. I could talk about it nonstop. So feel free to continue the conversation anywhere else. I'm happy to jump back in.
Okay. All right. I think unless there's something else that needs to be said, or we'll call it for the evening and say thanks to you all. It was lovely. God bless.
Thanks, Gino.
Next time it will be, are we in the end times? No joke. So that's what we'll do next time. We'll see what everybody thinks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Gino. Thanks, Hala.
Yeah. Bye-bye, Evan.
God willing, Gino.
God willing.
We're still here. We'll talk about it if we're still here.
That's right. Well, now there was a joke about, I'll be quiet. I'll be quiet. See you later.